So our second panel truly has some of the voices and thought leaders in this field that you really want to hear from. I'm pleased to introduce Jonathan Chandler, the Executive Director, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Please come on up. Daniel DiMartino, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and also the founder of the Dissident Project. Daniel, thank you. Pleasure. Lydia Moynihan, correspondent for the New York Post. And Jackie Alexander, last but not least, the CEO and president of Honest Reporting. Well, we just heard Moshe Glick's story. A man stands up in a parking lot outside a synagogue, gets charged by the state, gets pardoned, and the mob is now under federal investigation. What we didn't hear, what was behind that mob, who put them there, what built the ideology that drove them, and what funded their organizations. Before we can dismantle the pipeline, that's what this is, a radicalization pipeline that leads to the acts that we're seeing. Acts that don't just target Jews, but target Christians, target Muslims, target all Americans who are trying to exercise their rights. There is a radicalization pipeline at work, and the result of that is violence. The result of that is the violence we saw on Saturday night in Washington, D.C. And one of the questions, the first question, is really how we identify and how we address that radicalization. But first, I think we need to expose it and to understand how it works. So I'd like to start with Jonathan, because you have done amazing work on tracking terrorist financing, on identifying these pipelines, on how radicalization works and the effects it has. So can you tell us a little about that, please, the radicalization networks?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and kudos to all of you for being here and standing up for the right thing. So congrats to everybody here. Yeah, I mean, my background is as a terror finance analyst at the U.S. Treasury. I used to track Al-Qaeda and Hamas money in the early years of what we used to call the War on Terror. Now nobody calls it that, even though it still continues. When I left that job, I went on and did a bunch of different roles in the think tank world. The story gets interesting for me somewhere around 2012. We had a philanthropist come into the office and said, "We see some weird things going on campus." This is 2012, right? And I said, "What do you mean weird things?" He said, "Well, you know, there are all these groups, and they all seem to have the same chants and the same placards and the same speakers and the apartheid wall that they've been bringing to campus, and something's going on here. It looks like there is a trend that they're all following. They're all taking, maybe singing from the same sheet of music." And look, I'm a think tank guy. We do terrorism, we do foreign policy, and my first inclination was to tell this guy, "Yeah, no thanks. We don't get down in the dirt with college kids. That's just not what we do, right?" At which point he takes a very large check out of his pocket, and I said, "We're fascinated by all this campus stuff." But actually, the reason why we decided to do it was not because of the money. What we actually he said, if there is a Hamas connection, if there is a foreign funding connection, this is very relevant to foreign policy, and this is absolutely worth your time. And I said, "Okay, you know what? If we find that, absolutely, let's do it." And then we went about looking for a needle in a haystack. And that went on for a good year and a half. We just did not know what we were looking for. This is before the encampments. It's before all of this stuff that we're all so familiar with right now. And I remember the day, a young woman that was working for, incredibly talented analyst, who was just dogged. She knew what she was looking for, and she eventually found it. She comes into my office one day and says, "You've got to look at this tax document." And I look at the document, and it's got 9 different people that worked for Hamas charities that were shut down in the United States for breaking our laws, for terror finance. And I look at it, I recognize 9 of the names, because these are people that I used to track when I worked at the Treasury Department. And so we pull it all together. It takes us 6-8 months. We pull together the research, take it to Congress, testify before Congress, not once, but twice. House Foreign Affairs, House Homeland. Guess what happens after Congress hears about this? Nothing. Congress, as we like to say, is a weapon of mass discussion. There is really not a lot that they're going to do about this, and it's starting to drive us a little crazy. So what do? We take it to other people in the federal government. We take it to law enforcement. Turns out there's literally nothing that anybody wants to do about this. Now, we let this thing drop, but we keep tracking these guys because they are all people that have been involved in Hamas charities, and now they have raised a campus army. And you can see it, even back in 2014, 2015, you could see exactly what SJP was up to. Fast forward to 2023, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, right? We're watching what's happening on campuses with the encampments, and I get a call. First call actually was from the Treasury Department. Hey, can you come in? Can you help us track Hamas finance abroad? But then I get a call from the Department of Justice, and they say, hey, do you happen to know anybody affiliated with Hamas here in the United States? And I'm going, are you kidding me? This is insane that it took almost 10 years for you to come back and ask about this. Now, we have shared everything. We've testified again. We've presented everything to anybody who's asked. But I got to ask, what have they done to stop this? Nothing yet. And that's something that we need to work on.
And that nothing yet is the problem, and that's what we need to address. And I think we'll come back to that after a few more questions. But the question to think about is, where do we go next? What is that next step for action that we can all take to push for action? Daniel, if I'm correct, you're from Venezuela.
That's right.
So you saw a country that was a free democracy, and you saw indoctrination, you saw radicalization, and you saw that democracy fall. When you're looking at the United States and you're looking at K-12 and college campuses, what comparisons, if any, can you draw?
Well, in a way, it's much worse indoctrination here for this ideology than it ever was in Venezuela, because Venezuelans were simply deceived by a very evil man that persuaded them, that was very charismatic, not unlike our current political situation in New York City, but at the national level, right, and in a much more criminal way. But what I saw, I came to America a decade ago, and one of the things I saw is that there are so many people who hate their own country. I remember a few months ago, I went to speak at the University of Central Florida. If you know something about Florida, there's a lot of Cubans, right? And for the first time ever, I met a Cuban-American college student who supported the Cuban regime. And of course, he was Cuban-American in that he was born here, of Cuban parents. He never even went to Cuba. And he called his own parents gusanos. Gusano is a word in Spanish for worm. That is the insult that the Cuban dictatorship uses against its own people for being opposition to them. And I wasn't trying to even persuade him as much or debate him as to simply feeling very sad that somebody could say such a word against his own parents, right? And that made me think, how can somebody come to these ideas, right? Clearly you didn't get it from your family. You're getting it from social media, you're getting it from high schools, you're getting it from college campuses. Sohran Mamdani's father was still a college professor at Columbia, Marxist college professor. I was looking at the other day, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she was supporting the fact that her daughter had just visited Cuba, right? Cuba is in large part to blame for what happened in Venezuela. They're doing a lot of communist influence in our country here. And Ilhan Omar's daughter went as part of this flotilla with Greta Thunberg, Hassan Piker, you know the crowd, and staying at the 5-star hotel, the whole thing. And Ilhan said something that was very telling in her statement of support for her daughter, which was that Cuba had trained all these doctors, including my own childhood doctor. Her childhood doctor. Where was her childhood doctor then? In Somalia? Yes. Why were there Cuban doctors in Somalia in the 1980s when Ilhan Omar was growing up? Do you guys know why? Because in the 1980s, Somalia was a communist dictatorship for which Ilhan Omar's father was a general of. And Cuba didn't just send doctors, Cuba sent military service members that propped up the Somali dictatorship, that destroyed Somalia, that caused the refugee crisis. And the United States government, in infinite wisdom, decided to say, we're not going to welcome the people fleeing communism, we're going to welcome the communists who destroy their own country. And then we're going to raise little communists who are going to prop up the Cuban dictatorship and destroy us from the inside. So this is the problem that we have. We have a policy of ignorance from the federal government, from the state governments, and it allowed the universities to be taken over. It allowed K through 12 schools to be taken over. I've spoken at public schools in North Carolina, rural Burlington, North Carolina, if you guys know. Burlington High School, if you want to know the specific high school. Don't dox them or go after them, but a teacher, a Spanish teacher, had a picture of Che Guevara in his classroom in Burlington, North Carolina. This isn't Manhattan, okay? This isn't Brooklyn. This isn't a very liberal area. This is a very red area. Why are there paintings or pictures of Che Guevara in our public high schools? Would it be appropriate to have one of Mao Zedong or Hitler in public high schools? Is that history? Is that culture? That is the problem that we are facing here. And by the way, I think conservatives are waking up, but it took a very long time.
Oh, absolutely. And the education problem, that's part of the pipeline. It's not just Che Guevara, it is Mao, it is these days Hitler. You see students putting his picture on displays at schools and understanding strong leaders, which is absolutely revolting that teachers even allow this to happen. And we also have this radicalization pipeline that takes shape through education, where we're inviting PFLP leaders into our classrooms as examples of resistance. So we're really changing the language. So education is one pipeline, social media is another, but we also have the actual media. So first part to Jackie is this is something that you've been dealing with a lot. How do we get to a point where the media is pushing these narratives unquestioningly and actually changing the way people think by not actually allowing critical thought and just putting out what we call propaganda?
One of the things that we have to recognize, and October 7th put this into very clear focus, is that Hamas has a very sophisticated propaganda network. I don't understand why we don't treat Hamas journalists the same way that we treated Joseph Goebbels as part of the propaganda of the Nazi and that they were Nazis themselves. But the world has decided that Hamas propaganda is separate and apart, and those are real journalists. But Hamas has a very sophisticated propaganda network. And they have a training network for photographers, for journalists. It is generational. And when you look at the pictures that the Hamas photographers take, they are some of the best in the world. And that's no joke. They really are trained well. So I want to give you, I want to talk about a narrative. And when I say narrative, let's be clear. That's a lie, right? A lie that is circulating right now. Honest reporting is known as a pro-Israel media watchdog, but we've evolved with the times over the last 25 years, and we are now an information watchdog. And what we've done in order to track information is we have built a proprietary AI tool that allows us to see narratives, lies, as they are building before they get large. So to give you the background before the lie, back in February, the Hamas Ministry of Economy in Arabic puts out a statement to the people of Gaza saying, we have 6 months worth of basic supplies to keep you safe. Do not do a run on the markets. We can meet all local needs for food. 6 weeks later, Hamas, in English, the government media office, puts out a press statement. And that says that Israel is engineering starvation in Gaza. Now, no media picked that up. But clearly Hamas was trying to push something out. Hamas has its own aligned media outlets. So immediately, Quds News Network picks up that press statement and puts it out onto social media. Other right-wing, alt-news aligned, ideologically aligned outlets pick it up. Think Mint Press News, which is Iranian aligned. So they start putting that out there. And then you have ideologically aligned accounts like Suppressed News or The Savior. And they start talking about engineered starvation and now famine that is in Gaza. And they're using information that came from the press statement that Hamas put out without actually talking about Hamas, as though it is just accepted information. From there, UNRWA starts posting, and Doctors Without Borders starts posting about how Israel is destroying the very quality of life that exists in Gaza. So what happens? The media doesn't quote Hamas. The media doesn't quote these these random accounts on X, they go immediately to Doctors Without Borders, and that's what they start posting. So you have this entire laundered filtration that comes from a very sophisticated propaganda unit that Hamas has built over the years.
That propaganda seems to be getting through to many newsrooms, and editorial decisions seem to be made that don't actually filter it. So I guess my question to Lydia is, from what you've seen, how does that happen? How does an institution that's supposed to be a protector of democracy, of freedoms of speech and of thought, how does it become perverted into one opinion or one mainstream direction?
Well, news ultimately is a business. That's just the reality. There are some great people out there who are very committed to speaking truth no matter the cost. But most news operations are trying to figure out how can we survive in this day and age when there's so many content creators who are making millions. How do we stay relevant? And so news outlets are primarily looking at traffic. What traffics well? What are people, and it might be bots that are just reading this story, but they're really looking at that as their metric. And I'd also note, I feel very fortunate to be at the Post, where I think we have a lot of ideological diversity, but most of these news outlets are 90 to 95% liberal reporters. They've gone through the system. They've gone through the educational system that Daniel was talking about. They haven't been faced with any sort of alternative viewpoint, and they're in such an echo chamber that I don't think it even occurs to them to sort of ask these questions. And I mean, at least with CBS, now Barry Weiss, that's the first mainstream publication that's basically said this is all according to the Hamas Authority, right? This isn't actually anything that's independently confirmed. So at least she's kind of noting that this isn't something that we can just trust. And, just sort of as a relative, I'm not that young anymore, but as a relatively young person, it's been so remarkable too to me to see among peers growing up, Christian friends, we all were sort of aligned that we were supportive of the Jewish people, supportive of religious freedom, all of that. And I think the embrace of conspiracy theories, which is rooted in some cases, very understandable things. People were very disenfranchised after COVID, and now they've just sort of latched on to every conspiracy theory. And at the same time, you have the emergence of the content creator. And what is very interesting is that it doesn't even have to be out there. There could be a content creator who has no idea that there is money from terrorist organizations that's basically propping them up, because the way YouTube ads work, you can buy ads against a specific topic, right? And so there, with a little bit of money, a couple $1 million, you can essentially change the algorithm. And so there's creators who see, oh wow, every time I post something negative about Israel, I'm making a lot of money. And that is incentivizing them without even realizing it to continue to post anti-Israel content. And I think, we know a lot of people go fundraising in the Middle East. We know where some of the money comes from. Obviously, we need more understanding of tracking and where all of it comes from. But that is really pernicious. Is there are people who are trying to strike it out on their own as journalists. They know that they need to support themselves, and they see that they're getting paid, that they're getting more YouTube views, that their content's going viral whenever they talk about this. And that is actually pushing a lot of this forward as well. It's just remarkable to think you can change narratives with a few $1 million. We even saw this in the 70s. This is a well-worn playbook with the Vietnam War. The Soviets put a few $1 million into basically helping, people get some signs, pushing a few protests, and that money alone completely changed the narrative. And so I think both the social media ad buys and putting a little bit of money into getting everyone on the same page, printing those signs overnight, that has, I think, in some ways changed public perception in just a matter of years.
Sticking with you for a second, is that something that we can replicate to get the truth out, to get the reality out?
Yeah. It's funny, there's this trope that Jews control the media, and I think we can all agree that's kind of the farthest thing from the truth. I think it also has to be very strategic. You also have to maybe start buying ads against something that's a little bit more pro-Israel. That's certainly one way to do it. I think recognizing, though, that this isn't an organic thing, that it isn't organic that people suddenly all just woke up one day and decided to be anti-Jew and anti-Israel. I think it is really important to call that out, and there are people noting, this isn't some original thought that you had, that one day you just woke up and decided that Israel's just the worst thing in the world. So I think calling that out and realizing this isn't some sort of heterodox, sexy, original view. And then I think that people who are looking to support Israel need to understand that can be a very effective way to spread a message they support is those YouTube ad buys.
Let me say something about this. It's not organic in that it didn't start organically, but I do fear that it's perpetuating itself organically, and especially among young people. Look, I'm a young guy, I'm 27, and nobody talked about Israel until like a few years ago. Like in like normal political conversations in the conservative movement, like it was just not a big thing because, hey, we have inflation, immigration, economics, so many issues to talk about. And for me, it was very strange how people began talking about Jews or Israel at all. Look, I never held any view of this issue because living in Venezuela, I never met a Jewish person until I came to the United States. So how could you be anti-Semitic against somebody you don't even know? And then when I got here, there are people who are Jewish, just like there are people who are other religions, and that's like normal. And then October 7th happens, everybody starts talking about this, and instead of creating this rallying for the victims of the terrorist attack, these people managed to fund so much opposition that even within the conservative movement, I mean, all the memes online are about Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel, and about the Jews, and about how they control things. And some of them, by the way, they're effective because they're funny. And then they perpetuate themselves among young people who are not even political. And that is what we need to fight against. Honestly, we need to fight against it with better memes, with better jokes, with things that are more viral.
That's an excellent point. And Jonathan, a lot of these kids, well, young people who perpetuate these memes, who live in that ecosystem, let's say that they're SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. But looking historically, you have something like Holy Land. It launders money for terrorists. It gets shut down. Then a few years later, you have CARE. SJP gets shut down. They get rebranded as Columbia University Apartheid Divest. We seem to have this problem where we just keep dismantling one organization, but not well enough for it to not come back in the next iteration. Is there anything that we can do about that? What ideas do you have?
Sure. It is a game of whack-a-mole, right? That is exactly what has happened. Is one group gets shut down, another one pops up. That one gets shut down, another one pops up. This has been, right? They just keep renaming themselves. So yes, it's a problem. One thing that I think we don't have are good guidelines and laws for when we grant 501c3 status to an organization, have we looked at the people that are running it? Are they people that used to run previous charities that were shut down? And wouldn't that be an indicator? Wouldn't that be a major problem, right? If they're taking foreign dollars, we should know about it, and we should be taking, look, I do think that one really important thing that is lost in all of this, and it's a common thread amongst all of us here today, when we look at the money that is coming in, I am concerned really about one country primarily that is funding a lot of this, and that's Qatar. Now, this is not a country that most people think about. It's like a tiny little zit on the back of Saudi Arabia. Nobody can point it out on a map. But let me just say, they control 12% of the world's energy. They are Hamas supporters, Taliban supporters, Muslim Brotherhood supporters, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. I like to say these guys are it's like the cantina scene in Star Wars. It's like every bad actor in the universe is somehow congregated in Qatar.
Also the Venezuelan regime, by the way.
And Venezuela, yeah. And what's amazing is we have a base right down the street from where all these bad actors are. It's our largest air base in the Middle East. It's our Combined Air Operations Center, the CAOC. And, it begins to raise this question of, why are we putting up with this? Why are we allowing a terror financier? Very clearly, that's exactly what they are. They're spending $30 million a month to keep Hamas propped up heading into the October 7th attacks. And we know now that they're spending money all across the university ecosystem. They're spending a huge amount of money in the media ecosystem. I got to tell you, we have to start to put these guys to a choice. My grandmother used to say, a blessed memory, with one tokus, you can't dance at two weddings. We're going to have to force, we really have to force the Qataris to figure out which wedding they want to dance at. Is it with us or is it with the jihadists? And I think this is a major problem. But let me just, I'm going to preview some work that will be coming out from FDD, from my organization, very soon, and it'll be very relevant to this conversation. Number one is we took a look at the amount of money that the Qataris are spending across the United States, how much they've invested just in the last decade or so. The number that we have, this is a number that we have with receipts. $430 billion in investment across a range of different industries. And I got to tell you, that number is a lowball. I mean, if you hear what Donald Trump says, if you hear what the Qataris themselves say, they're saying it's $1.2 trillion that they've invested in this country, and that enables them to get that kind of influence. Now, everybody has probably heard about the money that's been sloshing around in higher ed. We need to get a better handle on that. That is somewhere between $7 and $13 billion, because, you know, the Qataris really care. This autocratic jihadist dictatorship, they really care about liberal arts education, right? I mean, this is insanity that they're allowed to do that. But now here's the little spoiler for what is coming out from FDD in the coming couple of, let's say, 2 months from now. We have found millions of dollars in K through 12, including right here in New York. So coming soon to a theater near you, but it's time to start to purge the Qatari influence, which I think is actually enabling all of this that we're talking about today.
I think it's safe to say that everyone in this room is looking forward to that report. Qatar, through Qatar Foundation International and other groups, has been spending so much money in K-12. A lot of us see those maps, the famous maps that don't have Israel on them, that have Palestine. Where does that come from? QFI. Where do some of these teaching materials come from? QFI. So I applaud that you're doing this.
And by the way, just so everybody knows, QFI is not a registered foreign agent in the United States, even though it is funded, I believe, entirely by the Qatari government. It's not even a 501c3. It is an LLC that is somehow throwing off millions of dollars into the education space, and no one seems to be bothered by this. It's time to take a closer look.
So, absolutely, thank you. So Jackie, sticking with that for a second, Qatar has been very good at reputation laundering, if we can call it that. It is not a sponsor of terrorism. It is a major non-NATO ally. It's convinced our elected officials that it is our friend, that it wants to help us in the Middle East. And we see newsrooms that are looking at this unquestioningly. How does that happen? What can we do about it?
There was, I think earlier this week, a member of the Qatari ruling family was introduced on a major news segment on TV as just being a fellow at a think tank without giving any sort of background information. What we're seeing across the media sphere as a whole is that they're not either doing the research that they need to do, which is how you get the BBC making an entire documentary that they then need to pull because the main focus of that documentary was a Hamas-aligned family. So they're either not doing the research because they don't want to ask the questions, or they are purposefully holding information back, right? You see all of these staged photos of a child holding an empty container looking for food in Gaza, going back to the famine doctrine, the famine narrative. And it is a perfectly clean bowl that they are looking in. They're standing by themselves. But if you zoom out, you see 20 photographers taking their picture. Did you know that according to Reuters' handbook, they are not allowed to publish staged pictures, and if a third party stages it, it is still as though considered per their own handbook as though Reuters had staged it and they're not allowed to publish it? Just this morning, we found a series inside Reuters Images that had 20 of these staged photos. It's happening on a regular basis. What they really don't like happening is sitting in the sunlight. They love to stay under the radar, to ignore when we come out with an expose saying this is inappropriate. They don't like the light that is being shined on them. And they've said it. There was the bureau chief from Reuters of the Middle East, based in Beirut, did a podcast about a year and a half ago where she said that she has to watch her back because of organizations like Honest Reporting that are shining a light on their bad practices. So under the theme of what we can be doing, we need to be holding the media accountable. You're right that there are a lot of people who want to do good, and there are a lot of journalists, including ones in this room, that are putting out incredibly, incredibly good work. And there are other ones that are trying to put out good work and being sabotaged by their editors. But there are also far too many who are simply lazy and going straight into the anti-Israel narrative, whether it's because that's what they were taught or that's what gets the clicks, and they need to be held accountable. So when you see something coming from a trusted source showing that this is a bad actor, that this is something that has been debunked, that the media is trying to put out there as real, share it, get loud, write a letter to your local station that then reprinted that. Because I will tell you, a lot of times those local stations will be responsive to you as someone who is in their local market. So get loud and make sure that you're signing the petitions and that they are hearing from you, that you're aware that they are pushing lies.
And that sounds like an excellent thing. And that sounds like an excellent motivator. That sounds like an excellent thing for activists who are then Jew hatred to do, is to put out these campaigns to alert the media of what is being done and how these reports are not accurate and how they are substantially affecting these businesses. So this is why we need people to sign up to these action items so they can help get the word out, sign these petitions, sign these to send email campaigns. But ultimately, what does accountability look like? Sticking with you for a second, what does accountability ultimately look like? Because we have this dream that the New York Times will suddenly have a come to Moses moment and realize that everything that they've been doing is wrong and change their editorial practices, but we never see that. So what could we see from news organizations?
Back in December, Hamas published a manifesto. We recognized in that manifesto photos that were being used, that were being sold on places like Reuters Images and Getty Images. So we reached out to those organizations and we said, I'm not a lawyer, and I get in trouble from my husband who is a lawyer for giving legal advice, so I apologize in advance. But I took a look at that, we took a look at that, and we said, from our eyes, there are three things that could be happening here. Number one, Hamas legally purchased those pictures, in which case I have a lot of questions about, terrorism funding, material support. Number two, they didn't pay for those photos, and Getty's and Reuters have already sent them a cease and desist, in which case, fantastic, we'll drop it. Or number three, Hamas didn't pay for those pictures, you're aware of it, you're not doing anything, in which case I have questions about material support for a terrorist organization. And as usual, Reuters didn't say anything. But Getty came back very angry, and they said, we don't have exclusive rights to sell these photos. So if they're using them, they could have gotten them from Anadolu, which is a Turkish state-run news agency, which almost every single photograph that you see in mainstream media is being laundered through them. They could have gotten it from there. They could have gotten it from the photographer themselves. And, this is very inappropriate and wrong that you're calling us out for this. Why couldn't they just have put out a statement that said, we had no idea Hamas was using this and we condemned them? Full stop, we would have been happy. That's all we want, is accountability for these news agencies to come out and recognize that through a whole host of things, whether it's staged images, whether it is local fixers and producers on the ground who are trying to push stories that they know are wrong and fake, or whether it's the laundering of information through the NGO industrial complex, which NGO Monitor actually did a great job of exposing within the last year, of how, similar to the Muslim Brotherhood, similar to what the Nazis did and what the Soviets did, every single NGO that operates inside Gaza has one or many more than one Hamas assigned to it. And they knew this was an NGO that we could work with. This is one that we had to work with quietly. Here's who we have to push in order to get things done. If I know about it, now you know about it, you cannot tell me that these multi-billion-dollar news agencies don't know about it, and yet they play along because they can. And that's the part that needs to change, and it's likely that legal action needs to be taken.
So Lydia, do you think, based on that it needs legal action, or is there some other way that we can get newsrooms to do what they need to be doing, which is at the very least disclaiming and explaining the inherent bias there?
Well, I think it's yes and. Again, I think when we talk about the media, it's a very large, not sort of single-minded organization. Mostly it's a lot of really underpaid people who are just trying to get the clicks and go home. And so I think people want the path of least resistance in that industry. If they see legal action, if they see that they're gonna somehow face a consequence, they're gonna wanna eliminate that, right? Because again, like, yes, there are some really strategic people, but most people, this is the government, this is why I always have a hard time believing in conspiracy theories. Most people are not that smart. They're just trying to make a paycheck and go home. And so if you have legal action, if you have somebody who doesn't want to get in trouble with their editor, they're going to respond to that. So I think that's a really effective way. If somebody violates a code, if somebody says something inaccurate, yeah, you need to follow up. Anytime you see something like that, point it out, because people don't want a headache. They just want to move on. So people I found in the media are very responsive. When they get threats, nobody wants to be embarrassed. They're happy to change it, and they'll probably be a lot more aware of something. So I think that the legal piece is key. The other piece is counter-programming. When 10/7 happened, I, like Daniel, was like, I haven't really thought about Israel too much, right? Most people, contrary to what the media narrative says, most people are not really impacted that much by Israel. It's kind of insane to think that such a small country with such a small number of people that is like a speck on the map there in the Middle East gets so much attention. And so I thought, okay, how do I learn about this? And I ended up ordering a DVD from CBN because I was like, I don't feel like I can find really reliable, good content, really reliable documentaries about what's going on. And so I think that's a huge opportunity as well. Again, most people probably aren't going to go to CBN and order a documentary on a DVD. And so I think we need to be doing a better job of creating content, creating videos, creating things that people are going to see on social media that kind of explain what's going on, right? And I found that compelling, but it was kind of a lift, I guess, when most people are just happy to scroll on TikTok. And so I think the counter-programming, putting things out there that are going to offer an alternative, that's the other key, because you need to reach people where they're at. And right now, again, most people are just blindly being fed something, scrolling, and they don't even think about it. And so I think it's really important, whether it's putting money behind that or just creating that content and putting it out there needs to be counter-programming.
Excellent point. Daniel, how do we get that counter-programming into the hands of people who will actually listen to it?
I think it's a lot of it is actually, people talk about social media and yes, and the media. I'm a big believer that it's all about the family. I'm a big believer that if Jews, through their own families, they pass those values to their children, we wouldn't be seeing the things that we're seeing today. How many people who identify as Jewish in New York City voted for Zohran Mamdani? Is that the media, or is that a failure at home too? I think that we need to take accountability for our own things. I see it in people who fled from socialist countries. There was this great story during the election about the child of Polish people who had fled during communism, and then the daughter was canvassing for the DSA. I'm like, how did the parents allow this to happen, right? And of course, not everybody is going to succeed. It's not going to be a 95% success rate. But if you just increase the success rate, if people talk about this inside their homes, if you educate children since they're young, because if you don't do it, the K-12 system is going to do it. The colleges are going to do it. TikTok is going to do it. Closing social media access for teens. All of those steps that parents can take, that you can take at home. And not just parents to children, inside your own family. I tell this to students when I speak on campuses all the time. The person you're most likely to persuade is somebody who knows you love them and that loves you. You see, it's very hard to persuade a stranger. Why? Because you don't know that they have the best intentions at heart, right? That they have your best interests in mind. But you know that your brother or your sister has your best interests in their mind, right? You know that they love you, even if you fight with them. You know that your son, your daughter, you know that your parents, you know that your best friend, you know that your friend group, you know that they love you. And so that's the kind of place where you can have an influence. I think young people have a big role to play here, young people who are like-minded like us. And that's where I would say the action item for everybody here starts.
And Jonathan, rounding things out, maybe cynically I say that when you look at our elected officials, they've had a lot of meetings with lobbyists from the government of Qatar at every level. So what can activists, what can people do to raise awareness and to get change? Who do they even go to? Do they go to their Congress members? Do they go to a federal agency? What is the best place that people should focus their energy on right now in this sphere, bearing in mind your report that's coming out, to get action?
Sure. I mean, look, it is not an easy thing to go up against one of the wealthiest countries with zero overhead and unbelievable amounts of cash that they're throwing around. These reports that will be coming out, they will be evidence-based. And so we can actually begin to purge. There need to be consequences for when the Qataris are caught red-handed with their hands in our K-12 system. I mean, look, one of the things that drives me crazy is the Qataris sponsor the congressional baseball game in Washington every year. They are sponsoring, right, or they just did sponsor a White House Correspondents' Dinner party, right? This is naked influence buying, right? And there needs to be consequences for this. So what we need are actually overhauls of our laws. I think federal, I think, by the way, even at the municipal level, I mean, New York is rife with this too right now. So federal, state, municipal, we need to look at it. I mean, and you should be out there if you're an activist. Make sure everybody knows the Qataris, maybe they're friends, maybe they're investing here in the United States, and that's one way of looking at it. But they've got blood on their hands. That entire country has blood on their hands for Hamas, Taliban, Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, the list goes on. And that evidence is irrefutable. We have all of the receipts of all of the things that they have done over these years. You need to bring that to your member of Congress. You need to bring that to your council person. You need to bring that to the White House and to the State Department. They don't hear it enough. What they keep hearing is, oh, these guys, they're investing billions of dollars. They're propping up our economy. Sorry, not worth it. There need to be consequences for what the Qataris have done. I actually think we should be working right now to repeal their major non-NATO ally status, and we should be working to impose sanctions on this country because they are, in fact, state sponsors of terrorism. It's time to flip the switch, and I know there's a lot of enemies out there, right? You're fighting the battles on campus, and we're thinking about Iran, and we're still thinking about Hamas, and there's Hezbollah. Well, this is one government that cannot be allowed to continue to function business as usual in this country. They are the key patrons of Hamas, and they have yet to be held accountable for what happened on October 7th and every day since.
And I think that's a very good endpoint to this panel, focusing on what we actually need to do and highlighting the importance of action, not just complaining about the problems, but we have them identified. You have the receipts. We have this knowledge. Some elected officials are already acting. I think we've seen the last couple of days the Georgia State Legislature passed a bill that goes towards education disclosing funds that are being received by, they didn't name it explicitly, but it's Qatar. So we are seeing movement on state level, and it's something we all need to amplify and push more. So thank you all for an amazing panel. And thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to hold a couple. I'll put it over to Jonathan.